Have you ever wondered why, even when you try to do everything right, your life seems to fall apart without warning? What if the pain you're feeling isn't a sign of failure, but your soul's attempt to wake you up? Crises don't arrive by chance. They are encrypted letters sent by parts of ourselves we've forgotten, silenced, or abandoned to fit into a superficial world. And when those parts can no longer bear being ignored, they collapse. Not as punishment, but as a cry for truth. Carl Jung called this process individuation. To him, emotional collapse is not a failure, but rather the first step of a rebirth. The soul, tired of playing a role, tears down the stage and demands presence. In this video, we will walk through the ruins of crisis not to overcome it, but to understand it as a symbol. We will explore how the unconscious speaks through dreams, shadows, losses, and how all of this might not be an end, but the beginning of something more authentic. If you feel exhausted, confused, or silent, this video is for you. Because what feels like destruction may actually be the start of your most important crossing. The invisible crisis, when the soul asks for rebirth. Maybe you believed everything went wrong, that you lost your way, that you failed, that you shattered into fragments impossible to piece together. But here's something no one ever told you. Behind the appearance of ruin, there's a symbolic language, and every crisis is a secret language only the soul understands. Carl Jung said emotional collapse is often the moment when the ego, the structure we build to survive, finally meets the self, the deepest and truest center of our psyche. And when that meeting happens, it doesn't come with soft lights or pleasant promises. It arrives as shock, as loss, as the feeling of being lost. But what if this isn't the end? What if it's actually the only real path back to your essence? Individuation is not a luxury of the soul. It is a vital necessity. And often, it begins at the exact point where everything seems to fall apart. Because as long as we are committed to maintaining the image, the character, the old self, there is no room for the new to emerge. The pain you feel is not punishment. It is the soul's symbolic mechanism asking for silence, presence, surrender. It is pulling you from the surface and directing you to depth, the only place where you can still breathe. No, you are not broken. You are in transition. And the soul only calls this strongly when it is on the verge of being reborn. Returning to normal, the trap of the wounded ego. Right after a crisis, the most dangerous temptation arises, to return to what once was, to resume routine, old habits, the former version of yourself, as if the collapse were just an accidental interruption. But the unconscious is not naive. It doesn't produce symptoms by chance. It doesn't cause ruptures just to put you back in the same place. The unconscious has a purpose: evolution. The conscious mind, limited and conditioned, seeks safety. It wants repetition, familiarity, control. Neurologically, we are programmed to prefer what we already know. But the soul doesn't want comfort, it wants truth. And often, truth must break normality to be revealed. This tension between the ego, which wants to restore the known, and the self, which demands transformation, is the hidden engine behind every awakening. So when you try to move on without integrating what the pain revealed to you, you are wasting a precious calling. It's like covering a broken mirror with a cloth and pretending the image is still intact. The crisis didn't come to be overcome, it came to be decoded. And sometimes that decoding requires silence, pause, detachment. It requires you to ask, what in me needed to die so that something more true could be born? The invisible mistake is trying to stitch torn fabric with old thread. But there are pains that don't want repair. They want rebirth. The unconscious, like an invisible architect, sabotages everything that hinders its expansion. And it will do so as many times as necessary until you stop running and finally allow yourself to grow. The healing shadow. When darkness reveals light, there is a part of you that doesn't want to be seen. A part that feels anger, envy, fear, melancholy. that thinks the unthinkable, resents, feels ashamed of existing. This part is not a mistake, it is the shadow. And it is inevitable. Carl Jung never proposed we defeat the shadow. He knew what is repressed returns, what is ignored screams, and what is hated possesses us. Healing does not come from defeating darkness, but from recognizing it without being consumed by it. But how can we love something that seems to destroy us? The first step is to understand the shadow consists of everything your personality tried to hide to be accepted. Not just what is ugly or dark, but also what is powerful, intense, true. Often, within it lies the talent you suppressed, the desire you denied, the courage you numbed. When you enter a crisis, the shadow comes to the surface. Not as punishment, but as a mirror. And the greatest internal saboteur at that moment is resistance. The attempt to eliminate heavy feelings, to think positive, to ignore the signs. But feelings are not enemies, they are messages. Every anger, every deep sadness, every paralyzing anxiety is trying to tell you something. And it will only be transformed once it is heard. The shadow is the part of the soul that has not yet received conscious love. When you face it without judgment, something sacred happens. It stops chasing you and begins to collaborate with you. What once seemed like a destructive force reveals itself as pure psychic energy once imprisoned. And then, paradoxically, the darkness begins to light the way. Because the gold of consciousness is almost always buried in the dark soil of our own shadow. Dreams as a compass, the unconscious shows the way. When reason no longer offers answers, the unconscious begins to speak in another language. An ancient, forgotten, but still living language, the language of symbols. And it is in dreams, especially during times of crisis, that this language reveals itself most strongly. Jung saw dreams not as mere nighttime fantasies, but as authentic expressions of the self, trying to compensate for the imbalance in consciousness. They are letters sent by the soul to the surface of the mind. Vivid, strange images, sometimes disturbing, but full of truth. During a crisis, dreams often intensify. They become more vivid, more dramatic, more symbolic. This is not random. It is the unconscious trying to restore the inner guidance that the external collapse has erased. Maybe you dreamed of a blocked road, a fierce animal, a lost child. That's not absurd. These images are living metaphors of your psychic state. And when observed closely, they become maps. Imagine someone who, after years of emotional silence, dreams of a broken bridge between two shores. The next day, they realize that this bridge symbolized their broken relationship with their father. And by understanding this, something within them reorganizes, not magically, but symbolically, which, to the soul, is the same as healing. Recording dreams, day after day, is an act of reverence for the soul itself. Write them down, draw them, reflect on them. Over time, symbols repeat, archetypes emerge. And then, internal chaos begins to take on a shape of meaning. The soul does not abandon us in the dark night, but it doesn't shout, it whispers. And almost always, it whispers in symbols. Listening to these whispers is a deep act of self-love. It's like lighting a candle inside a silent temple, and realizing over time that every dream is a sign. And that, even unknowingly, you are already being guided. Rebuilding the old self, the mistake after the collapse. When a storm ends, the immediate impulse is to rebuild. To put back what was torn down. To return to the previous form. But this desire to go back to normal may be the soul's biggest mistake, because what existed before was not always real. Sometimes it was just comfortable. Jung said that individuation requires the creation of a new psychic center. This means that after the collapse, you shouldn't try to be who you were, but allow a new being to emerge. A being that integrates what the crisis revealed, that carries the scars as symbols, not as shame. The problem is that the ego, accustomed to familiarity, wants to maintain control. It tries to restore the old routine, the same relationships, the same thoughts. But something has changed. And even if you try to go back, you won't be able to inhabit the old psychic body anymore. Because you saw, because you felt, because you crossed. The pain of crisis exposes the false center that's self-built to please, to belong, to survive. And when it falls, a void appears. But this void is not absence, it is sacred space. Space for something new to be born. But for that to happen, you must endure the crossing. The interval between what has died and what has not yet been born. And in that space, the invitation is clear. Don't rebuild the old house, build a new temple. But how do you know if you're trying to restore the old self? Observe your impulses. If all you want is for things to go back to normal, you may still be trapped in the old. But if there is within you a quiet call for authenticity, for wholeness, for truth, then the new center has already begun to emerge. This new center is not a mask, it is an essence. It does not rely on roles or fixed identities, but on deep listening to what your soul wants to express. And only those who allow this new beginning find themselves whole again. Inner alchemy, transforming pain into consciousness. In the ancient tradition of alchemy, there was a quest to transform lead into gold. But for Jung, this was not just a physical process, it was a metaphor for the psyche. Lead is raw pain, dense suffering, the confusion of collapse. And gold is consciousness, clear, whole, reborn. Inner alchemy always begins with the negredo, the stage of decomposition. It's when everything darkens, when the old world falls apart, when the soul sees no way out. This is not the end. It is the beginning. Because only what disintegrates can be reconfigured in a more truthful way. In the negredo, there is no hurry, there is decomposition. There is a return to the essential. The ego cries out for meaning, but the self only observes, patiently waiting for you to surrender. Not as defeat, but as acceptance. The soul doesn't want you to overcome the crisis. It wants you to be transfigured by it. And slowly something changes. The albedo appears clarification. Moments of insight, sudden clarity, remembrance of what is essential. You are not yet new, but you are no longer old. You are in process, in transformation, in fusion. Finally, the rubedo arrives, the red of awakening, integration, the birth of gold, expanded consciousness, embodied truth, compassion for yourself. Not because the pain passed, but because it was understood, transmuted, loved. Jung knew that suffering is not an enemy, it is raw material. And that every human being carries within them an inner alchemist. Someone who is not afraid of darkness because they've learned that the purest gold of the soul lives there. So do not run from the dark. Look at it with reverence. Breathe within it. And when you least expect it, you'll discover that the lead that once weighed you down has already begun to shine. Rebirth in the dark. The soul's silent call. Perhaps the pain you're feeling today is not the end of the road, but the beginning of a path you never dared to walk. Perhaps the crisis is not your ruin, but the symbolic baptism your soul needed to finally emerge. You are not broken. You are being rebuilt from within. The shadow that frightens you carries the map. The strange dream is the voice of the soul. The urge to run may, in fact, be the deepest call to return to yourself. Individuation doesn't happen on bright days, but in dark nights. It's in silence, in the loss of meaning, in confusion, that something begins to reorganize silently, but truly. Like roots growing while everything seems still. And what if, instead of trying to escape, you sat in that darkness for a moment, just breathed there, and asked with your heart, what does this pain want to teach me? Because maybe your crisis is your initiation. If this message spoke to something deep within you, if it stirred an echo, a sense of relief, or even a silent tear, then this channel is your place. Here, we don't speak to the persona, but to the soul behind the eyes. Follow and subscribe. Not to hear ready-made answers, but to continue this crossing together. Because there is a path, and you don't have to walk it alone. Now tell me, what if what you fear most to feel is exactly where your soul wants to be reborn?